Hi there, everyone, and welcome to Crohn's and Colitis Canada's third annual Jaclyn Fisher Symposium. Our event today on managing IBD at school and work is the last event in our 2021 series and is made possible with the generous support of the Jaclyn Fisher Foundation. My name is Cal Spellman, and I'm a co-moderator for today's event. I was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis in 2015 and have been volunteering with Crohn's and Colitis Canada for the last 4 years. Also joining me today are my co-moderators, Maya and Evan.
Hi, I'm Mia Bourget. I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease in 2017. I'm a volunteer with Crohn's and Colitis Canada and was an honorary chair for Gutsy Walk in 2020.
Hi, I'm Evan Gautreau. I'm 15 years old and I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease when I was 10. Since then, I've been volunteering with Crohn's and Colitis Canada and I was an honorary chair for the Gutsy Walk in 2019. Before we meet our panelists for today's event, we'll go through some technical logistics. This event is being offered in English with live simultaneous French interpretation from BG Communications. If you would like to listen in French, please select the interpretation icon, the little globe, in the Zoom menu bar and select French from the list. If you're tuning in from Facebook, French interpretation is not available.
Cet événement sera offert en français avec une traduction en direct vers l'anglais. Veuillez sélectionner Interprétation et Français dans le menu Zoom. Si vous connectez à partir de Facebook, l'interprétation en français n'est pas disponible.
If you experience any technical problems during the event, please try refreshing your website browser or relaunching the Zoom webinar. You can also comment in the chat box found in the webinar menu bar, and we'll follow up with you.
Si vous rencontrez des problèmes techniques pendant cet événement, essayez d'actualiser la page ou le navigateur ou envoyez-nous un message en privé dans la boîte de chat.
If you have a comment or question, please use the chat box found in the Zoom menu bar. If you're tuning in from Facebook, please use the live stream comments. We cannot answer questions about specific medical situations.
Si vous avez une question, veuillez la poser dans la boîte de chat située dans la barre de menu Zoom. Si vous nous rejoignez depuis Facebook, veuillez utiliser les commentaires du live stream. Nous ne pouvons pas répondre aux questions concernant les situations médicales spécifiques.
Now, we are very excited to introduce our panelists for today. First, we have Shannon Epstein, who has been volunteering at Crohn's and Colitis Canada since 2013 after being diagnosed with IBD. Her involvement has included running fundraisers in the Montreal areas to raise both funds and awareness in the young adult demographic, along with collaborating with Crohn's and Colitis Canada's national office on various projects. These include the Young Adult Event Series. Outside of Shannon's volunteering effort, she is a full-time CPA specializing in the financial services industry. Please join me in welcoming Shannon.
Thanks so much, Cal. Hi, everyone. I'm Shannon. So thank you so much for that brief introduction. So as Cal said, I've been a volunteer with Crohn's and Colitis Canada since 2013. I was also diagnosed with Crohn's in 2013. So I have had both, and I've been a part of this initiative since my diagnosis. I've helped raise money and awareness in the 18 to 30 demographic in Montreal mostly, and have since been involved with the national office helping with different initiatives, and I'm very happy to be here with you all today.
Thank you, Shannon, for sharing your story and being with us here today. Our next panelist is Claudia Tirsukini, who was diagnosed with IBD at the age of 10. While in high school, she began volunteering. While in high school, she began volunteering in clinical IBD research and has been involved with IBD research ever since. In an effort to form deeper connections to the IBD community beyond the realms of research, Claudia began volunteering with her local Crohn's and Colitis Canada chapter over 5 years ago. She has a particular interest in improving the pediatric to adult IBD care transition by using the gaps that she's experienced in her own care to educate others and to inform and shape clinical practice. To achieve this goal, Claudia co-founded and currently leads the Young Adult Community for Crohn's and Colitis, YACCC, which aims to empower and engage IBD patients through this transition period with various social and education events. She has been a member of the steering community with the Young Adult series since its inception. She is looking forward to sharing her experiences and expertise with other young adults in the hopes that they may have a smooth transition to adult care and beyond. Please join me in welcoming Claudia.
Thank you, Evan, for that introduction. I am so excited to be here with you all today. Just a little bit of background. So I was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis when I was 10, and I was relatively stable for a very long time. I kind of even forgot that I had IBD until I transitioned to university, and then had a rude awakening and a reintroduction into what it's like living with IBD when I had a massive flare-up. And that kind of sparked the passion and interest in volunteering with Crohn's and Colitis Canada to build a deeper community and connection with others that have IBD, and also to now found YAC to help other young adults going through that transition process so that they hopefully have a smoother transition into adulthood with a chronic illness than someone like I did. So I'm very excited to be here today and looking forward to answering your questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Claudia, for sharing your story and being with us here today. It is my pleasure to introduce our final panel member before we move into the panel discussion and start answering your questions. Caitlin McQuaid was diagnosed with Crohn's disease in 2016, shortly after her 50th birthday. After learning of her diagnosis, Caitlin looked for ways to connect with others living with IBD, to hear experiences and learn from them. She attended her first local chapter meeting and was hooked. Caitlin also works as a Crohn and Colitis Canada as a patient programs coordinator. In this role, Caitlin supports patients and their caregivers in navigating and managing their journey with IBD. She is passionate about research and contributing to her community. Please join me in welcoming Caitlin.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. As you've all heard, I was diagnosed in 2016 with Crohn's disease. Been on a few medications and very grateful the ones that I am on now are working well and keeping me in remission. My local Crohn's and Colitis Canada chapter has connected me with so many lifelong friends, so have been so grateful for what they've brought to my journey, and so looking forward to sharing my experiences with everyone today. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Caitlin, for taking part in today's event and sharing your story with us. Now we're ready to start the panel discussion. Our panel will answer questions submitted by participants ahead of time and offer advice, tips, or strategies to help you and your loved ones manage Crohn's and colitis while studying at school or in the workplace. If you have any questions or comments, be sure to use the Zoom chat box or Facebook live stream comments. A friendly reminder that unfortunately we cannot answer questions about specific medical situations.
The first topic of discussion and question is, I am concerned that my Crohn's or colitis will flare up while I'm in school. Have any of you experienced this problem? And do you have any advice or tips for coping with IBD symptoms at school? And I'll ask Shannon to kick things off, followed by Claudia.
Thanks, Evan. So I was fortunate to have not had any flare-ups while I was in school. So I was diagnosed when I was in university. So I was in courses, I had a full course load. So I was quite lucky to not have had any symptoms from my Crohn's disease. However, I was diagnosed in university and I was still trying to find a medication that was working at that time. And I was someone, and I still am someone, who does not tolerate medication very well. So in the 0.05% side effect, that was my person, that's me. So essentially, I had a lot of symptoms because of the medications that I was trying out. So I often did not feel well in school. So for those of you who are having an IBD flare, might be similar repercussions in a course-like setting compared to me that was sick from my medication. So first thing that I would say is, look into what support is available to you. The worst thing I think, and I have done this many times, is to kind of push through and hope that you can accomplish everything that you would have in the absence of your symptoms and also be sick, because having negative repercussions for your health will last a lot longer than studying for a test or trying to get through a course. And so I think it's important to take a step back and look at the big picture sometimes and say, okay, my health has to come first. I don't feel well anyways. What type of support is there for me? Is there accommodations that I could speak to? Can I go directly to my teacher or professor? Is there a guidance counselor in my school that could perhaps help me with this? So that would be my advice on this one.
So I agree with everything that Shannon has said. As you heard from my background, really the flare-up that I had while I was in university kind of changed the trajectory of my young adulthood life, I guess I would say. So it is a difficult challenge to deal with for sure, but I think that it's important to have what, I don't know, I lost the word, have certain things in place so that if you do have a flare up, you are ready when that comes. So something that I had set in place for myself, which I think we're going to talk about in the next couple of questions, but is accommodations in school. And I really relied on those accommodations to get me through that flare up. So those accommodations really allowed me to take a step back and focus on my own health and in getting through that flare up, rather than on my academics, at least for a short while. So that really helped. And I think it's important to do those things before you are in a flare, because it's going to be very difficult to try to manage the difficulties that come with symptoms of a flare up and trying to get access to all of those supports then. So it's something that I registered even before I entered university, and I didn't have to touch until I was in third year, but when I needed it, it was all set up and ready to go. So that would be my advice for this question.
Thank you. Our next question is, are there any accommodations that students with chronic diseases like IBD should be aware of in secondary school, university, or college? Claudia, we'll start with you.
Okay, perfect. So just a continuation of the last question then. So there are some accommodations that you can get in school for having IBD. Every secondary school, university, or college should have access to these types of accommodations. In university or college, they are normally called accessibility services, or you can just search up student services at your school and specifically look for accommodations, and you should be able to find them that way. I never had accommodations in secondary school, but I would imagine that could be something that's set up with a guidance counselor. In terms of the actual accommodations that are offered for IBD, you can normally get testing with breaks. So for example, I took exams in a separate room from my entire class called the exam center. And I was able to go up to a test proctor and say, okay, I need to take a break. They would stop my test time and start break time, and then I would be able to go to the washroom during exams. And that really helped take away the stress of potentially having an accident in the middle of an exam. That was completely gone because I was able to get up and use the washroom as many times as I needed to. Another accommodation that I got was extensions on certain exams, certain assignments or tests that I needed. So if I needed to postpone a test or exam, that was something that was available to me. If I needed an extra week or two to complete an assignment because of a flare-up, that was also an option. Another thing I got, which might kind of change with COVID and the increase in virtual schooling now, but another thing I got was note-taking. So there were people who had volunteered in my courses to take notes for other students that had accommodations. And that meant that I didn't have to commute or go into class if I wasn't feeling well, because the notes for that course were available if the lecture wasn't recorded. So those are just a few accommodations that I got. There might be some extra ones that other panelists may have experienced. I'll let them speak to that in a second. The only thing I want to mention is that it takes time to get accommodations set in place. So like I kind of said earlier, start as early as you can. You do need some medical documentation. So you might need to have an appointment with your family physician or your gastroenterologist to get all that paperwork all set up. And then it normally takes another meeting with the accessibility advisor where you kind of meet and go over what kind of symptoms you have and what kind of supports they have that can help you. So start early.
Thank you. And speaking of accommodations, our next question is, should I talk to my teachers or professors about my Crohn's and colitis? And do you have advice on talking with educators about accommodations? Claudia, we'll start with you.
Okay, yeah, so my advice is kind of similar to everything I've said so far. So start early. I would start maybe like in the first course, the very first class that you have with every prof, and kind of go up to them maybe at the end of class, and just try to let them know that you have accommodations set up in place, that you are a student with a disability. You don't have to disclose your actual diagnosis. You just have to say what accommodations you have and just let them know, just give them a heads up. Sometimes accommodations, when you get registered for them, you'll have a letter that specifically outlines on paper what you are eligible to receive. And that normally is good for a prof to see in advance. So you can either email that to them, or in a face-to-face conversation, you can just hand over that letter to them. It just helps just so that they know, so you're not asking for an extension on assignment one day before it's due. They kind of have your name and face in mind, so they know that that's kind of something that can happen. If they do have office hours and you feel more comfortable talking to them in a one-on-one setup instead of just approaching them at the end of class, that's also something that you can do. But I would definitely advise just letting them know as early as you can, just in case something does come up, then they are aware of it already and they can also help further support you along.
Thanks, Claudia. And just to add to that, for those of you who might be thinking that it's embarrassing to get accommodations, or you feel like there's a stigma associated with having IBD and you don't want to talk to your teacher, I didn't benefit from any of the accommodations and accessibility that were available to me. I really was diagnosed like during my university career. I had no idea about these things. I was just kind of trying to make it through. I'd be the person who didn't eat before exams, or definitely no coffee before exams. So if you feel like it's embarrassing or there's a stigma, it's our job kind of now to break that, and there shouldn't be one, and you're not at a disadvantage because you're living with IBD, and you should take advantage of whatever accessibility is available to you if you do want it and you think you could benefit from it.
Yeah, and just to add to, if a prof is not going to be accommodating towards you, you can always go back to your accessibility advisor and they can be the one to have that conversation with the professor on your behalf. So you do not have to be the one to continue that battle on your own. There are further supports that they can offer you if that conversation becomes a difficult one. Thanks, Shannon.
Thank you. Our next question is, I am concerned that my Crohn's or colitis will flare up when I am at work. Have any of you experienced this problem? And do you have any advice or tips for coping with symptoms while working? Shannon, we'll start with you, followed by Caitlin and Claudia.
So because I was diagnosed in university and didn't have a lot of symptoms for my Crohn's at the time, I was lucky enough to have symptoms when I entered the workforce. So I started in a large accounting firm, and the hours were difficult to say the least. So I have to say that my health fell down the ladder in terms of priority, which I now understand was not the right approach. So I was quite sick during the time that I was working, still experimenting with medications, and it's not easy. So my advice would be, you don't need to tell everyone that you're sick. You don't have to tell anybody that you're sick. It's really up to you whether or not you feel comfortable doing that. You have to kind of, it's up to you and how you're feeling and how much you feel your symptoms at the time can interfere with your work. But my best thing to say would be, find a person, or if you feel comfortable with your superior or someone else who knows about your disease and trust that you're going to do good work. At the end of the day, my experience has been, if I'm going to get my work done and I'm going to perform well, my disease doesn't matter. So if I need to take a day off here or a day off there, or I need to finish earlier one day versus another, everyone has been super understanding of that. Just because you have IBD, like, people have all sorts of illnesses and all sorts of things that could prevent them from doing their work on a specific day at a specific time. So you should definitely be open about it in a contained way. You don't want to make your work necessarily all about it, but as long as people know about it and trust that you're going to get your work done no matter what, definitely be open about it. Don't ever be afraid to leave a meeting because you have to go to the bathroom. Like, I will just get up and go. And people just drink too much coffee and they just need to go to the bathroom anyways. And generally speaking, people who are in back-to-back meetings all day might have to take a break to go to the bathroom. So just because it's because of your IBD doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with leaving and going to the bathroom, and if you need to take a day off work because you're not feeling well, you need to take a day off work for a test like colonoscopy, whatever it might be, people get colonoscopies who don't have IBDs, people get MRIs who don't have IBDs. So you shouldn't be ever afraid to ask for what you need and those little time off, as long as, if you're a good employee in general, none of that really will matter. And you should be able to establish trust with your team in order to accommodate any issues that you might be having at a specific time.
So I'm going to echo a lot of what you shared, Shannon. So I was actually in the process of getting diagnosed while I was working, and I was working as a waitress. So I was on my feet and moving around a lot. I was pretty lucky because it was a smaller space to be working in. So I was able to kind of go to the washroom as I needed, and ask for time off to get the test, to get the diagnosis. Since then, because medications have been really helping me, I haven't had a lot of concern in terms of dealing with a flare at work, but I have felt unwell at work. So, ask for what you need. Like Shannon said, I can't emphasize that enough. Sometimes it's like a trusted coworker, or if you have a good relationship with a supervisor or manager, you can let them know what IBD is and how it's affected you in the past. You can share that you're in remission and doing really well. That might change for you in the future. When it comes to like any accommodations, you can talk about needing washroom access or downtime, and they may ask for supporting documentation similar to what you may have had to provide if you got accommodations when you were in school. But usually that's pretty easy to do. You just kind of have to plan ahead. Like Claudia said, around getting accommodations at school, starting early has been helpful. And I find it really helpful to have shared my diagnosis with my last employer. I didn't share it in terms of my employer before, but having the knowledge that I was dealing with something and not being able to access what I needed with my employer, I didn't enjoy the feeling. So the first day at my last job, I let them know right away that I lived with IBD, but it was in remission and I was doing well. So I was at that point not a concern for them, but they at least knew ahead of time.
Thank you for all of your answers. The next question is, are there any accommodations in the workplace that people living with Crohn's and colitis should be aware of and access through their employer? Caitlin, we'll start with you, followed by Shannon and Claudia.
Sorry about that.
So a great place to start is to connect with the Human Resources Department or a person at your employer, and have a conversation with them around what you need. You don't have to disclose that you live with IBD, but you can let them know that you need some accommodations. As many of us who have been working know, there is training that you do with your employer around accommodation and the duty to accommodate. So don't hesitate to ask them and have a conversation. As I mentioned in the last question, you may need to provide some documentation to support the request, but usually human resources departments or individuals with human resources know about the variety of things that people live with. As was shared earlier, we're not the only people living with chronic illnesses, and there are lots of us that need something a little bit different day to day at work. So that's all from me. So I'll hand it over to the others.
Yeah, I would agree. I think, just go through your benefits package if you have one, understand what you're eligible for in terms of your insurance, what you could claim. And if you're ever confused, go to HR and speak to the person who knows about your benefits very well.
Yeah, I would just echo what Shannon and Caitlin have said so far. I think Caitlin's approach, I liked that. I always like just having things set in place early on. And then if you do fall into a flare, it's something that your employer is aware of and something that they can, again, further support you through, rather than having that barrier of having to tell them while you're already going through such a difficult time can also be an added stress that can further contribute to the flare. So just having things set in place from the beginning, I think, is the best approach.
Thank you. Our next question is, do you have any advice for those with IBD that are seeking for a part-time or full-time job? For example, do you have any tips on what to look out for employers? And how can I find out if they have any accommodations that meets their needs? Claudia, we'll start with you.
Okay, I think we kind of answered this question in the past two questions, but maybe just to add for like any tips to look out for on employers. Sometimes in a job description, you can see at the bottom whether, I think all employers should have this, but just a little blurb about disability and how they are going to approach that either in the interview process or just in general in the job. I think that's something that's nice to see going into a new position. Then you know that they are open and honest about accommodating individuals with disability. I think that's all I want to add here. Shannon or Jaclyn, do you have anything else to add?
The only thing I would say is, some people think about whether or not they should bring it up in an interview. My advice is to be like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't speak to your skill set. So don't feel like you have to disclose that. You never could not get a job because of your IBD if you meet all the qualifications. So it's really not necessary, in my opinion, to bring it up, unless you absolutely have a question about it or you feel like it might interfere with your work, depending on the type of job that you're applying for.
Yeah, I was just going to add that comment that you don't have to disclose in an interview because it's not necessarily applicable to what you're going to be doing in a job. And I was thinking about the question around like what to look for. So you could maybe, if you're in an interview, ask about the organization's like workplace culture or values, and that could also give you some insight.
Maybe I'll just ask a question to Caitlin and Shannon. We'll turn this around. So I don't have experience with this at all because I work with gastroenterologists in an IBD research center. So I am very open and they all are very aware of what IBD is. But what would you say is an appropriate time then to potentially bring up the fact that not necessarily that you have IBD, but that you might require some accommodations, if not during the interview process?
Yeah, I mean, in my experience, I've worked in a few places. Like sometimes I would bring it up right away. I just felt like comfortable, and there was kind of an opening for me to bring it up. And maybe we were talking about IBD about someone else anyway, so it just naturally came up. In other experiences, some jobs, I never felt the need to bring it up at all. I was feeling well. It wasn't pertinent at the time. If I needed to take a day off for a medical thing, it wasn't totally fine like anybody else. And then in other situations where maybe my disease was flaring a bit more and I had a lot of doctor's appointments, I was still looking at what medications I needed. I had no choice but to bring it up right away because as soon as I started working, I needed to have frequent doctor's appointments. And actually, when I was working at my first job, I was also diagnosed with arthritis, and I did have to go to arthritis rehab every Friday morning for like 16 weeks. So on Fridays, I just started work at 10, but I made a deal with my boss that I would make up the hours either like during the week or on the weekend, and it was totally fine. And I'm happy that I was able to kind of bring that up with him and have the flexibility with my schedule, so I didn't need to be stressed, because in general, it was stressful having that diagnosis and having to take time off to go to rehab.
So I've kind of done it both ways. So I had one job where I didn't disclose until after the probation period because I wasn't sure about what they were going to think about it and how it would impact my possible ability to stay working there. I found it difficult to keep it the secret because I was so connected to the community, especially my local chapter. So I found it difficult to do that and have been hesitant to do that again since, but that's up to each person, I find. So with my latest employer, I was able to bring it up really easily and to let them know right out of the gate so that if they had questions, they could ask me right away. And I found it easier because my disease was well controlled and I wasn't in the process of like switching a medication. So I could say, hey, I'm doing really, really well. So at this point, I don't need any accommodation or any help, but I might in the future, and I'll let you know. And it's also helpful for those like specialist appointments where you don't always get to pick what time the appointment is. Sometimes you are kind of told, this is the time that you're coming to see me.
Or this is the day. I don't
Yeah.
know when I'll actually get to see you. Yeah. Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your answers. The next question is, I'm struggling to find treatment that works for me. Do you have any advice or tips for people to cope with changes to their medications while studying at school or working? Shannon, we'll start with you.
Okay, well, yes, I still am struggling to find a treatment. I think I'm on my 7th medication, and we're in the you're under control but not in remission situation, so anything can kind of change at any time. All to say, this has probably been so far one of my biggest challenges with the disease. Like I was saying previously, I have gotten side effects from everything that I've taken, the pancreatitis with the Imuran, the antibodies to the Remicade. I was sick on all of them, nausea from methotrexate, like you name it, I had it. All to say, it was difficult, and it still is difficult, especially when it's unknown and you kind of feel like unfair, like how come medications work for other people, their first medication, and they're totally fine, and you're here, maybe 5 years later, still looking for a medication that works for you. So my biggest advice here would be, if you're not feeling well, same thing that we've all said about IBD-based symptoms. The frustration, you have to just kind of think that the next one will work, or this one might work, that there's other things out there. So don't lose hope if that you haven't found something that's working for you yet. You just might not have tried the right medication for you until whenever you go ahead and try it. On the other side, what was I going to say? Advocate for yourself. So if you feel, sometimes there could be pressure from your doctors to go one way versus another way, and you might not feel like that's the best thing for you, or you might have questions about it. Speak up. Always talk to your doctors and your medical team about any reservations you might have about starting a new medication, combining medications, potentially switching medications, whatever it might be. Take the time with your doctor to really discuss any challenges you might see, or anything that you don't understand, or potential side effects, because that could help you choose the next medication to start, if there is a choice for you at the time to make.
Thank you. Our next question is, I am anxious about using public or shared bathrooms in the office or at school. Do you have any advice to help others cope with this concern or issue? Claudia, we'll start with you.
Sure. So I think just what Shannon said earlier, everybody has to use the washroom. Everybody has to use the washroom maybe multiple times during the day. It's nothing to be afraid about. Especially for like a public washroom, for example, where somebody might not even know how many times they're going to the washroom. In the office or at school, where you're in a little bit more of a contained space and somebody sees you leaving multiple times, again, that just goes back to like, did you feel comfortable disclosing that to the employer at the beginning or not? Do they know why you are leaving multiple times? Again, you don't have to share. You're just leaving the meeting to go wherever. You don't have to share, oh, I went to the washroom 20 times today. That is your own fact to keep to yourself. I would say in terms of, I think there might be another question about commuting, but if you're anxious about not being able to find a washroom, that is also like an extra step and added point to this question. I would say try to plan before you leave the house where washrooms are along the route. If you do need to change the way that you commute, for example, if you want to take the GO train instead of the TTC because you have access to a washroom at all parts during your trip, that might be something that is more comfortable for you to do. But yeah, just planning ahead. Knowing where washrooms are in case you do need to use one in an emergency. It's something that I still do to this day. Like I'm in remission, but I think it's just something that my mind has now programmed. Like I need to know where all the washrooms are just in case it might happen. And pack an extra change of clothes if you think that's something that would ease your anxiety about having to use the washroom and not finding one in time. Sometimes just even knowing that you have a spare change of clothes might help to ease the anxiety, even if you never use it. It might just be a tool that you have to help you feel a little bit more calm about that situation. And it's nothing to be ashamed about.
I just want to add that there are probably people in your life that are also anxious about using public washrooms that don't have IBD. It might be something that they are just uncomfortable with in general. So they may also be a good, helpful resources for you to ask questions of how they cope with those kind of situations. And there may be in your workplace single stall washrooms, then that might also make you feel a little bit more comfortable.
Thank you all so much for your answers. Our next question is, I have trouble managing the costs associated with my IBD. Are there any benefits or assistance programs that I can access to help me manage my living expenses or IBD treatments? Caitlin, we'll start with you.
So I can totally appreciate cost when it comes to living with IBD. I am taking a biologic medication, so coverage for that was certainly a concern for me. So when it comes to coverage, access the resources that you're connected with. If you're taking a biologic or a biosimilar medication, there are fantastic programs. You probably have been connected with a coordinator, and they are amazing resources to help you navigate the process for getting coverage. They know it really, really well, and they are the pros at this. If you're not sure about who that is, you can talk to your gastroenterologist or your healthcare provider's office, and they may be able to connect you with the right person. There are programs in every province and territory that may also be able to help you cover the cost of supplies associated with living with IBD, or income support as well. So if you're on the Crohn's and Colitis Canada website, there's a section around insurance and government support that has a list of all the programs, so both federal and provincial programs that you can access, and it'll give you information about eligibility and what you need to do to apply. So it's really great stuff to know. There are programs with the drug companies that might also be able to help you in terms of covering the cost of medication, like a compassionate care, in terms of giving you access to the medication at no cost while you're navigating the process of getting coverage. So you just kind of have to ask and connect with others who may have experiences with this before.
Thank you. Our next question is, what should I do if the private insurance provided through my school or my employer does not cover the medication I take to manage my Crohn's or colitis? Kaylin, we'll start with you.
That's a great question. I have navigated the process of changing insurance a couple of times with employers. And again, the coordinator that you may work with, if you're on a medication like a biologic or biosimilar, they are fantastic at this. I thought I knew the process really well the last time I changed insurance, and turns out I didn't, and ended up with a lot of headaches. So connect with those people right away if you're changing anything, so that they can step in and support you and navigate that process. In terms of if you're going through private insurance and you're running into issues around coverage, again, the patient support program or that coordinator is a great resource. But the Crohn's and Colitis Canada has a section on private insurance and has some fantastic resources, like going through the appeals process. So you may be denied coverage the first time, but there is an appeals process. So don't hesitate to do that process, because it might just be maybe the insurance company needed more information about the medication and why you needed it. And that might just be a simple letter from your doctor. So those are my helpful tips.
Yeah, I've also actually switched insurance companies a bunch of times as I switched jobs. My advice on top of what Caitlin added was to talk to your pharmacist. My pharmacist actually helped me facilitate the whole process. He called the insurance company with me to move my coverage over. So that could be a great resource as well.
And I forgot to mention that there are coverage options within maybe your province if you're having trouble with getting it covered. So there might be programs that you can access within your province to get that medication covered. And then maybe if you can check with your school and to see if they have any grants or loans or bursaries that you could apply for. So that might be also really helpful.
I was just going to add to that, going back to your physician might also be a worthwhile avenue to explore, because they're also very well versed in dealing with different insurance companies and are normally actually the first point of contact to set you up with that coordinator for the drug company. So for example, when I switched to Stelara, I was past being a student. I wasn't covered under my parents' insurance, and I was just getting set up to start a new job. So during that period of time, I didn't have any insurance coverage at all. And I was able to talk to my physician about this difficulty that I was facing. Stelara is very expensive. And he set me up with the coordinator through the drug company, and they were able to give me a couple doses on compassionate release, which meant that I didn't have to pay for them until my insurance kicked in. And hopefully it doesn't ever come down to it. But again, talking to your physician about if none of these options work, what are your other options in terms of medications? Is there something that's very similar that's not covered, that is covered by insurance, but is actually so similar to the one that's not covered by insurance? Like Cortimate, for example, is something that's very difficult to get covered by insurance, but there's other very similar types of enemas that are covered. So that is something, again, that your physician would be able to kind of steer the path on for you.
Once again, thank you all for answering all the questions. Our next question is, should I inform my current employer about our Crohn's and colitis? Shannon, we'll start with you.
So I think I might have answered this in a previous question. So again, use your discretion, whatever you feel comfortable with. But if you feel like you're not disclosing it because you think there's a stigma associated to it, or you're going to be judged, but you really feel like it will help you get through and perform better and have less stress associated to your IBD in your workplace, find somebody you feel comfortable with and disclose it. If you don't feel comfortable talking to your superior right away, you could always talk to HR or someone else who could help you navigate that process. But in my experience, it was never anything that I should have been nervous about. And, sometimes people just don't know about it. And it might take a little bit of education on your part to say, I have this is what that means. This is what it could mean in terms of me needing some time off or needing a more flexible work schedule. But apart from that, it's never seriously impacted my ability to perform well at work, in the sense that it never was seen as a bad thing in terms of my performance. It never was considered.
One thing I found is when I've been informing employers about my disease, some of them I found actually know somebody. They have a family member who has IBD, or they know a family member who has another autoimmune disease. So there's often a good way to connect with them around what you need, because they may be familiar already because of a family member or friend who has IBD, or even another form of an autoimmune disease. And then, it's a bit easier to deal with overall.
Thank you. Our next question is, do you have any advice or tips for people with IBD that have to travel for work or school? Keelan, we'll start with you.
So I think I'm going to echo something that Claudia already said, which was to plan ahead a little bit, especially around washrooms. I now know, I think, where every washroom that I am comfortable stopping at is along all the routes that I take. And how you travel to work can change. So maybe if you're traveling for business and you're going to another province or another country, don't hesitate to reach out ahead of time to, if you're flying the airline, and ask them about any accommodations you might be able to access while you're traveling. So that's kind of some helpful advice. But definitely, like, my favorite thing to do is plan ahead and know where washrooms are along the way.
That's a great tip about flying. I've actually never done that. That's the one area I've never tapped into yet.
I only found out about accommodation when I was traveling for fun. So I called them ahead of time and let them know, and they said, oh, let's just move you so that you can be closer to a washroom. So if you need to get out, then you can go right away, which was kind of a cool experience.
Yeah, I would say too, like if it is possible for you to take a different route that has more access to washrooms, if you would feel more comfortable going that way, try to do that if it's something that's possible. Like for me, when I was in undergrad, I used to take the subway every single day. And back in the day, wasn't that long ago, but if you left the subway, you had to pay to go back on. So if I got off the subway 3 times, again, I knew at every stop where there were washrooms that I could get off and go to. But if I got off, that meant I had to pay again to come back on. So then just kind of doing the math financially, I was like, okay, maybe it actually makes more sense for me to take the train because it has a washroom on board. It would save me the hassle of literally running, just trying to find a place off the stop. I could have a washroom right beside me and I'm paying the same amount of money anyway. So I just found that to be a much more comfortable commute for me. And funny enough, when there was a washroom there, I never ended up using it. So I think it's just the anxiety associated with not being close to a washroom. But yeah, just plan ahead and see if there are any other options for you, would be my advice. Yes, somebody put in the chat the Go Here app from Crohn's and Colitis Canada. Yes, that is something that I definitely have used before to try to find a washroom that was close by. So on the app, you can click where your location is, and then you can find a bunch of businesses or open washrooms that are around your location that have a washroom available for you to use. And that can be a great resource when you're on the go or in a place that's maybe more unfamiliar to you that you're traveling to. If they have access to Go Here washrooms there, that might be another helpful tip for you. Thank you for the reminder.
Thank you all for answering these questions once more. Our next question is, do you have any tips or advice for managing my diet and food intake while at school or in the office? Shannon, we'll start with you.
My diet has changed. I can't even count how many times I've changed my diet since I've been diagnosed with IBD. Even before, yes meat, no meat, yes this, no this. So yeah, I can provide advice on this one. So I think my biggest recommendation would be to meal prep. So bring your food with you to the office or to school, because you know that what you're making won't make you sick because you know what you can tolerate and what you can't. So my biggest advice would be that. Where it becomes sometimes tricky is if you go out for lunch with a colleague or you have a work dinner or something of that sort. But normally what I would do, and honestly most people do this nowadays, like check out so my advice would be to, what did I say? Oh yeah, check out the menu before. But honestly, I think everyone does this when they go to a new restaurant. Like, who doesn't look at the menu online and decide what they want in advance and pretend like you saw the menu for the first time when you get there? Anyways, all to say, see if there's an option for you, see if there's some way that you can make something work. And if there's really absolutely nothing, like, I'll just tell my employer, like, or I'll eat before, or I'll say, hey, what about this restaurant recommendation? I also am someone who tried to incorporate myself in the planning process of these type of events, especially when they're smaller based team events, so that I have some level of control of where we can go. So I know that I can eat there, and then usually everyone else can find something else. But you're not the only person who has dietary restrictions. There's people who are vegan, people who are vegetarian, people who have allergies. So you shouldn't be treated any differently because you have food intolerance.
One of my former employers was a big fan of potlucks. With COVID, we aren't doing those, obviously, but they would frequently have potlucks. So I would kind of know ahead of time I probably wasn't going to be able to eat exactly what everybody was going to bring. So I would pack similar things that I knew people were going to be making. So for example, if they were ordering pizza, then I brought a pizza that I made from home that I could just reheat at work. And then I was lucky enough one year to get a gift of a miniature crock pot. So it travels, so it heats things up. So it's been a huge help. So I can just kind of plug it in when I'm at work and my food can be heated up ready for me to go.
Thank you so much. We have a question in the chat. Our next question is, how can we get accommodations at post-secondary school for own dorm room or personal washroom?
So that's something, again, that all goes through the accessibility services department. So when you register to get accommodations for your academics, you're at the same time registering for accommodations for your living space. So that's something that you can talk about with that accessibility advisor. Maybe you want to have, like you said, a single room, like you're just living in it and you have a private washroom instead of a shared washroom. So that's something that you can try to organize, again, as early as possible, because those rooms will probably go first and you want to make sure that you're getting it because you need it. And somebody just doesn't get assigned it just at random, like you do deserve to have that room. So again, it would just be something that is through that accessibilities accommodation office. I never lived on res, so if anyone has any other tips or suggestions for this, the panelists. No, okay. But yeah, it's all done through that same office. So if you just bring up your concerns in terms of your living space, then they can help you manage that as well.
Thank you so much, Shannon, Claudia, and Caitlin. That is all the time we have for today. I'd like to thank all of our panel members for spending their time with us today and to share all their experiences, advice, and guidance. We greatly appreciate your involvement with the Jaclyn Fisher Symposium and supporting the Crohn's and Colitis community. And thank you to the Jaclyn Fisher Foundation for their generous support. We would also like to thank all of you for joining us today and your thoughtful questions. If you have any more questions or require support, please contact us at learn@crohnsandcolitis.ca. Please let us know how we did today. Your feedback is very important to us, and it will help us plan for future events for youth, adults, and caregivers affected by IBD. Please take 60 seconds at the end of this presentation to provide your feedback. A prompt will appear on your screen directly after this event to complete the survey.
And thanks again to BG Communications for offering free live French interpretation for our Jaclyn Fisher Symposium series.
Finally, you can follow us and stay tuned for upcoming events on our social media at GetGetsy. Thank you all, and I hope you have a great rest of your weekend. Bye for now.